Welcome to everyone, colleagues, partners, whoever has joined the session today. I just want to welcome you all. My name is Pam Cherry. I'm from the Moshal Scholarship Program. So today we are going to be having the fourth and final webinar as the National Bursary Support Providers Forum, and we're going to be focusing specifically on employment support, so the journey from graduation to employment. And what we're really trying to cover here is why it's important, what quick wins can be implemented. And to end off, we're going to hear from an amazing panel of employment experts on a few frequently asked questions. And at that point, you'll also be able to pose questions. So before we start, we're just going to go through some housekeeping. So first and foremost, if you could please just put yourself on mute so that we can avoid disruption and any background noise. So if you can just check at the bottom of your screen, there's a mute button to the left. And if you have any questions as we go along, please pop that into the chat. We will be answering that at the end of the session if there is time. If you could please keep your phone on you, you'll need your phone nearby as we will be asking you to contribute shortly via menti.com. And if you have any questions that maybe you need clarification or something wasn't covered, you're welcome to save that for the plenary session. And if your questions weren't answered, we will be sharing a list of all the participants. And so you can then email whoever it is that you wanted to pose your question directly. And then we will have a survey at the end, and we'd love to welcome you all to participate. There'll be a spot prize, so you don't want to miss out on that. Thanks, Paula. So as you see there, I mentioned the chat function. So if you need to speak and you need to communicate, you're welcome to pop it in the chat. And if you see to the far right, there's reactions that I spoke about. If you want to react and you're struggling because you can't speak, you're welcome to clap your hand or put a thumbs up. Okay, so thank you, Carla. You can move on to the next slide. Before we get started, I would like to just ask you to grab your cell phone and to go to menti.com. We're going to ask you a few questions just so that we know who is in the room, where you're coming from, where you are today, and also just to understand what organization you're representing so we know who's actually with us today. And also just a one word to describe what you'd like to learn from today's session. So if you see there, if you could go to your cell phone and you're just going to use the code 445788. I'm just going to give you a moment to grab your phones and go to menti.com. Okay, so like I said, the code is 445788. And if you could please answer the first question. So which province you're joining today? I can see we've got 6 people in the Western Cape. And I heard from Nicole that it's raining today. Sorry for you. Gauteng seems to be winning here. We've got 10 people from Gauteng. I'm in Joburg and it's lovely weather out here today. We've got 3 in KwaZulu-Natal. 12 in Gauteng, 10 in Western Cape. Okay, Monique, you're asking for the code. It's 445788, and it's right there at the top of the screen. Okay, it's lovely to see representation from the Free State. Suzanne says there's gorgeous winter in Durban. Oh, I wish. Okay, so mostly Gauteng. Is there no one from the Eastern Cape? Okay, so we've got 60 participants. So if you could please just go on and interact with us so we can just get a sense of where you're coming from. You can pop a chat there to let us know how you're doing and what the weather is like where you are. Okay. All right, so just as I mentioned earlier, if you could please keep your phone on you, if you could engage with us, we're going to go on to the next question. So which organization are you representing today? If you could please just respond. If you didn't get the code, it's 445788. Okay, we've got CareerWise, Students for a Better Future, the Moshal Scholarship, REAP, Tomorrow Trust, Dell Young Leaders. We've got UKZN. Lovely to see some universities there. We've got CareerWise. Oh, Colissa is saying Bloom is a bit warm today. Okay, TISA Foundation. Welcome, everyone. It's lovely to see people from different spheres, from different spaces. Investec, Santam, good to see some corporate representation. SAGEA, Investec, Umthombo Youth Development Trust, Mad Leadership Foundation. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Okay, so we can move on to the next question, which is basically one word to describe what you'd like to learn from today's session. So we're talking about employment support. So if you were to think of one word, what would you like to take out of today's session? Opportunities. Graduate attributes. Low resource, high impact. I love that one. I know that's definitely being covered today. Graduate placement, virtual interviews, best practice, employability. Quick wins. We're going to be sharing quick wins today. Innovation, work requirements, growth. Some people are putting 2 words, but we'll allow it. Work readiness, inspiration, innovation, resources. Okay, entry-level jobs, collaborations. So anything that doesn't come through, you're welcome to pop that into the chat in a question and we'll cover it. COVID, a hot topic. Benchmarking practices, pipelining. Awesome, awesome. Russell's interested to hear how COVID has impacted this whole space. Absolutely. Okay, CV, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, so that's exciting. I definitely believe that we've all come here for the same reason, and I know that we're going to be covering a lot of what we've seen in the words of what you're looking to take out from today. But like I said, if there's anything that you'd like covered, you're welcome to just pop a question and we can address that at the end. So I'm going to be taking you through the agenda today. So we're going to be looking at why employment support is essential, and Kathy Sims from SAGEA will be talking us through that. And then we're going to look at the impact of employment support, and Nicole Peterson from the Moshal Scholarship Program, as well as Caitlin Kurtzinger from the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation will be taking us through that. And then they will dive into ideas to get started. And lastly, we will end with the panel discussion. And at this point, you'll be able to dive in and ask all the questions that you'd like to ask. So I would like to welcome and introduce Kathy to just turn on her camera and speak to us about why employment support is essential. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Pam. Good morning, everyone. It's so lovely to be with you all. I'm just so incredibly sorry not to see you in person. So virtual hugs to everyone. So what I thought I'd do today is just talk a little bit about, first of all, who we are, just to give you some context, and then talk a little bit about kind of the latest trends that we've just seen, and then just talk about my thoughts in terms of what can and should be done going forward. So a little bit about SAGEA. We started back in 2004, and it really was off the back of my experience of working as a head of talent for a company called Accenture. We had a very, very large graduate program bringing in between 150 and 200 graduates a year. And I was constantly worrying about what good looks like. And the reason really was because at the end of the day, you know, if you're bringing in 100 to 200 graduates into your organization, it's expensive. It requires a lot of resources, not only from a financial point of view, but from a people point of view. And when you bring that amount of graduates into your organization, the last thing you want to do is fail once they've entered the organization and are either disappointed or headhunted or whatever the case may be. So I wanted to really understand what good looks like in terms of how do you attract the very best people into your organization? How do you select them? What does good selection look like? And ultimately, how do you onboard and develop someone as a young professional? I mean, essentially, companies have two distinct strategies when you look at their talent strategy. One is around we want to buy people. So that's your typical experienced hire model where somebody leaves the organization and you put out an advert and you select somebody to replace them. The other model is build. That is literally where you say, okay, let's build our own skills for our own pipelines of the future. And essentially in South Africa, there's a small community, not a very big community, but a small community that build talent, a very large community that buy talent. And then there's some organization who have hybrid models of let's build these skills in our organization and buy those skills. So you often see building of skills is around particularly the core business of the organization. So as I said, SAGEA grew from 2004. Literally at that time, we were 3 or 4 companies who worked together. It was Standard Bank, it was JP Morgan, the big accounting firms, Unilever, like that. And then, and we grew out, and now we represent about 350 professionals who really specialize in attracting, recruiting, developing, and retaining graduates. So that's a little bit about us. I lead the organization in South Africa, and we are very, very fortunate in that we have similar communities across the UK, the Americas, Canada, Australia, Singapore, etc., etc. So we've got a super community around the world that help us and support us in what good looks like. Next slide, please, Carla. Just a little bit on our membership. As you can see, we have a wonderful group of members that work with us to understand demand and supply, to understand the corporate markets. Sadly, I would say that we don't really represent government. You will notice some brands in there who are state-owned entities, like South African Revenue Services, the Auditor General are members, Financial Intelligence Center, Public Investment Corporation, etc., etc. But mostly what you're seeing is the big growth and the big drive in young talent is primarily sitting in the corporate market at the moment. Thanks, Carla. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about build versus buy. I read a really interesting article about 18 months ago, and it was really around, you know, do you build, do you buy, do you borrow, or do you bot? And I really thought that was interesting because that really is where people are at the moment. You know, do we need to get bots to respond to some of our consumer and customer services? Do we borrow skills in? And the gig economy is a perfect model of borrow as and when you need. But similarly, you know, our focus and our intention is around building. So just to give you kind of why, In South Africa, we have about 36% of our members who tend to follow a build strategy. And that is really led by the fast-moving consumer goods companies. You would know them as Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Nestle, organizations like that, the consulting firms and the legal sector. And really most programs and most graduate opportunities are around 2 years in nature. And what they do in those 2 years is follow a model around how do we build the skills that we need for our future leaders. Having said that, interestingly enough, there are some key challenges in the market. Some employers are saying, you know, the competition for the very best is really, really intense. Some people are really struggling with equity targets. And then obviously some people struggling with skill shortages as well. So that's just kind of a sense of overview of the talent market, particularly around the build strategy in South Africa. Thanks, Carla. So what we do every year with our corporate members is we sit down and really understand the demand and supply issues. What is going on in the market, what happened this last year, etc., etc. And here are some of the highlights that I just wanted to share with you, which will give you a sense of what happened at the beginning of 2020. So the medium, and we always work in mediums because that then doesn't get skewed by the very large employers, because some of our members do hire 700 graduates a year, but most of them are hiring about 23. So the median number of graduate vacancies in 2020 is 23. And that's up from 19 last year. So we've seen a steady growth over many, many years. We've been tracking this data since 2005. So nice steady growth. And I think about 19 of 23 industries still, you know, on the growth pattern. Having said that, 6% of vacancies actually remain unfilled. And that was as at May. So generally what happens is graduates would finish at the end of December, and they would generally start their entry-level positions around mid to late January, often February, and as late as March. So that's the norm of what happens. But as at end of May, 6% of vacancies remain unfilled, with not enough applicants who meet the selection criteria. Now, we can argue, what does that mean? And we've got lots of data that sits behind that from, you know, there are not enough particular skills yes, there are the skills, but they don't meet the other criteria. Candidates reneging on contracts, and this is particularly high in South Africa compared to other countries, I beg your pardon. And really what that talks to is that the very best candidates are actually getting between 3 and 5 offers and have a superb choice of opportunities to go to. And then the last point is late changes to business demand. And I know that often used to happen to me when I worked at Accenture, in that in November, one of our directors would come to us and say, oh, we've won a very, very big project at this company, late demand, we need another 27 graduates with computer science, please. And that was an absolute nightmare, because by November, and certainly in the days that I was working at Accenture, we didn't have access like we do now to, you know, LinkedIn and digital solutions to talk to students. But we would have to go and try and find students when they'd actually gone back home to try and get them to start jobs in January. It was a nightmare. So often late changes to business demand is a real impact, and that's where we can step in and really, really help to connect the dots. Almost half of the vacancies tracked in 2020 are coming out of accounting and professional services. So this is a very, very dominant build strategy in South Africa, the accounting and professional services sector. The median starting salary for all the graduates that started in 2020 was around 220,000, which is a very decent salary, starting salary. But having said that, there are certain positions that command very, very high salaries as well. And we're seeing certainly actuarial, quantitative skills, legal skills, and investment roles way in excess of 350,000. Companies put a lot of money, energy, and effort into attraction. And combined, our members are spending around 34 million on marketing activities in 2019 to advise and recruit for the 2020 vacancies. So that's a huge amount of money. And what we do obviously is dig real deep into that data to see what the best solutions are for particular organizations, particular skills as to where to find graduates. From a social media point of view, LinkedIn is still dominating the social media space with more than 80% of employers using this platform now. Application to vacancies are slightly down this year with a median of 82 per vacancy, down, as I said, from 92 in 2019. So, but this is still very high. So for every job that is available in an organization has literally 82 CVs to look through to get to the right candidate. So it's a real contradiction when you look at the second point I made around 6% of vacancies remain unfilled. So in particular sectors, let's say like FMCG, that number would be 300-400 CVs per vacancy. Whereas if you look in a scarce skills area, it could be 30 CVs per vacancy. Most employers are getting there with their equity targets, but not yet there. So 85% of our employers met their equity targets in 2020. Different successes in different industries, and we've got that data to talk through if anybody's interested. But essentially, equity targets remain one of the biggest challenges. And you know, then also overlaid with you know, the diversity challenge is really the gender challenge as well. So I don't think I need to tell you that, you know, finding sufficient females in engineering, in science, in technology, and in maths remains a key focus for employers in South Africa. Thanks, Carla. We usually do as part of this process, we usually do a look forward. And this year was the first year that we really struggled with this. And that because, you know, the whole impact of COVID, and this talks to the question that Russell had, is it's just so uncertain. So as an example, when we had our feedback session in July, we said to our members, we cannot actually report on the plans for the year ahead for the first time in 15 years, because there are just so many people ticking the box of saying, well, I actually just don't know. At that point, as at 8 July, and we check this monthly, so we're about to start the process to review it again and see how much has changed. But as at the 8th of July, 54% of employers are expecting a reduction in hiring plans. So that is real, and that's upon us. 28% of employers are looking at moving closing dates, while 33% are still uncertain. So what that means is, yes, they've got an initial plan, it's fluid, definitely 54% are reducing, but that's also decent that, you know, then about half are either staying as is or increasing. So it's not a terrible story, but it is going to be a tough story for our graduates for the 2020 class. Equity and scarce skills will definitely be the focus. There's just no getting around it. And I think one of the things that we need to really think about, because this will impact our graduates, is that, and I say the word untested because, gosh, we've had a real tough part in being involved in that, because technology doesn't always play with you. And I mean, the first virtual career fair that we helped our members run was really difficult, and we struggled with the technology. Having said that, in the next session that we ran a week later, it was absolutely brilliant. So it depends on bandwidth, it depends on access, it depends on data, it depends on electricity, for goodness sake. So technology is really the focus on attraction, with many virtual career fairs online and coming online over the next 3 to 4 weeks, because this is the primary attraction period for employers. And then all employers literally are switching to digital solutions around selection. So digital interviews, and that is anything from WhatsApp video to sophisticated technology like Highview and Sonru that use artificial intelligence, and psychology to figure out how the selection process works. So it's a really, really uncertain time. And as I said, we're checking this monthly. We've been doing this since the beginning of March to get a sense from our members what is going on. But it's challenging, to say the least. Thanks, Connor. So what does that mean, and how can organizations that support students help? Well, I think a couple of key things, and we can talk about it further in the Q&A. I think the focus really needs to be on educating students around the most useful ways to access a wide range of opportunities. Thinking about how you prepare your graduates for a flat market and what transition skills there are that they can use. Because the reality is that there are going to be some graduates where there just isn't demand. And how do you help those graduates figure out what else they can translate their skills to? Really focusing on what employers are looking for and helping students to understand that a degree gets you an interview potentially, but your attributes or the student's attributes will get them the job. So it's really helping students say, well, don't just rely on your degree, understand that there's a whole range of other skills that employers are looking for. Really helping students to transition through this digital attraction and selection process. It is intimidating, to say the least, if you've never experienced it before. And it's not just like having a WhatsApp chat with your mate. It is really quite different. So I think, you know, reach out and ask for help to understand how digital attraction and selection processes work. There's a lot of people with experience in this, so pull on your community to help. Prepare your grads to understand the job search and help them understand that it's not an outcome, but a process. And this process will happen every 2 to 3 years. And the reason that I say that is there is a worrying decline in the number of permanent jobs offered to graduates, with only 30% of roles this year being full-time roles. So essentially what we're seeing is that about 70% of jobs that are offered are either contract, are internships, or are have a set start and end date. And there's many reasons for that. But my concern really is, for example, that figure in Australia is sitting at about 80%. So 80% of jobs in Australia are permanent. In the UK, that figure is just upwards of 65%. So we have a particularly tough market in that employers are not committing to full-time roles. And we know from the student surveys that we do, or the graduate surveys that we do, that one of the key things that graduates look for is in fact a permanent job or security that it gets associated with the job. I think the other piece of advice I would give you, and this really comes from my experience of looking after the UCT career services for a couple of years before I joined SAGEA, is understanding where your role stops and starts. If you are going to offer career information advice, do you have a clear understanding of the labor market? Are you trained in offering career advice? And if not, do you understand a referral process? You know, it's very much like psychosocial support. You know, we must be very careful that we don't jump into the realm of being a psychologist, or we don't jump into the role of being a social worker if we're not trained to do that. And I personally, when I worked at UCT, stayed very, very far away from career advice. I was not trained in it. I did know the labor market. I did understand the graduate attributes and opportunities, but I relied heavily on my colleagues who were experts in career advice and experts in helping students understand the psychology of careers to do that. So those are a couple of the key points that I would like to add, but we'll talk about that later in the Q&A. Thanks very much, Carla.
Thank you, Kathy, for that. There's actually so many nuggets that you've already shared, which I think a lot of people can take away in the session, just in terms of how they can create and inform their strategies of employment support. I do want to just say that I know that Kathy has shared a lot of insights, a lot of stats, and a lot of information that you've probably found very useful. And so I'd like to just let you know that you can rest assured that we are recording this. So if anyone does need the recording, we will be able to share it with you. And we will also be sharing the slides with everybody. So you'll be able to just go through the content in your own time. So who will be having on next is Nicole Peterson, and she is the head of careers and alumni at our Moshal Scholarship Program. And alongside her will be Caitlin Kurtzinger, who is from the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation Program. And they are going to be speaking about measuring the impact of employment support. So I hope you enjoy this next session, and please remember to just pop whatever you need to in the chat, and we will cover it towards the end. I'd like to call on Nicole and Caitlin to come up and turn on your cameras, turn on your microphones, and I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Pam. Morning, everyone. Carla, if you can just flip to the next slide for me, please. So in April, May of this year, we had a look at the 278 alumni that we successfully graduated and put through university and are now in good jobs. And it was a time for us celebrating our 10-year anniversary to have a look at some of the successes and the impact that we've made. So we embarked on a intergenerational social mobility study. I'm very happy to announce that we had an 80% response rate of our existing alumni. So the stats that we'll be taking you through is really representative, and we had a good sample. So some of our key findings were that our alumni are earning significantly more than their parents or guardians, and how we looked at that in particular is what was the combined household income when they were scholars on the program versus their first job, which we will show you in detail on the next slide. They also have a significantly higher level of education than their parents and guardians. And for us in particular, 50% of the alumni who answered our survey, 50% of their parents did not complete high school or secondary school. And then also just from a contribution perspective, through tax income and their foregone state dependency, they're contributing to the country and therefore the communities and the wider world. The other factor that we also looked at is their payback period, which won't particularly be discussed as part of this, but between myself and Jody, we're very happy to share some of the findings. It's just the amount of time that it actually takes them to pay back, even though it's not a payback agreement, through their salaries, in terms of the time that the years that it took for them to complete their studies, and in terms of their income, how long it would actually take for them to pay it back. So those were the three key findings from the intergenerational social mobility study that we did a couple of months ago. Carla, you can flip to the next slide for me, thank you. So just in terms of the first aspect that I spoke around earlier on, so you'll see that from an average combined income perspective, and this excludes grants, it was around 4,323 thousand rand whilst they were on the program. And by the time they get their first paycheck, it is 6 times more than what it was when they were living at home or part of the core household. So we know that from a monetary contribution perspective, going back, it makes a significant difference going from 4,000 to 25,000. We know that obviously there's not all that money goes directly back into the household, but from a responsibility tax perspective, they are definitely not only improving their own lives, but the lives of the immediate family as well. So for us, this is really a testament that the work that we do in this broader community and everyone on the call definitely makes an impact in terms of improving their lives financially or economically. Thanks, Carla. Over to you, Caitlin.
Everyone. Caitlin here. So I just want to tell a quick story that really brings to life what Nicole was talking about, because I think sometimes we are talking a lot about numbers and data, but as we all know, there are actual humans and students and alumni that we're talking about here. So just quickly, I'll share the story of one of our Dell Young Leaders from the Dell Young Leaders program that I work with. And this young man is named Tupelo. Tupelo was originally from Limpopo. He came from a Quintile 1 school and went to university at the University of Pretoria, first in his family, a university student, and studied electrical engineering. So while at university, Tupelo faced many of the challenges that our students do, as many of, I'm sure, the other programs on this call as well face. So he faced academic underpreparedness challenges, psychosocial and wellness support challenges, and multiple things that the program, through our various interventions, helped him with in order to get to graduation. But what I want to highlight here, because we're talking about employment specifically, is how we really supported Tupelo and how his employment journey changed the life of his family. So as Nicole said, Tupelo was actually the main breadwinner in his family, supporting 3 younger siblings. So the fact that he was able to land a job with Anglo American, which has one of the top graduate programs in the country, specifically in the engineering space and mining companies, really invests in, as Kathy was talking about, building talent. And with a starting salary of 443,000 Rand. I think a key challenge in thinking about employment for Tupelo was Tupelo didn't have the best grades. So a lot of what we do in helping students access employment opportunities is helping them to just get connected to those employers, making introductions, suggesting candidate profiles, working with our partners to get students connected to roles and opportunities, but then also working with both the students and the employers to think about how we can help them to shape their experience and talk about their experience in a compelling way. So Tupelo didn't have the top academic performance, but he started a business or two while he was in university. He did multiple back works. He was a mentor and tutor. He was an outstanding, super smart young man that's quite successful now in the workplace. So helping both the employer to see that so that he could actually get past any minimum requirements, but helping him to speak confidently about those experiences in his CV and his interviews, etc. So again, this is just one story. We see many cases like this, and actually on average, our Dell Young Leaders are supporting about 5 people in their household. So really, as Nicole said, employment support helps lift entire families out of poverty. So Carla, you can go on to the next slide. Nicole and I will keep on the mic here. And we've talked a little bit about already sort of why is employment support important? What's the impact it can have from a data perspective, from an individual impact perspective. And now we just want to take you through a few quick wins that we're recommending that you could implement tomorrow and in the current COVID environment to actually get started. Particularly considering, as Kathy said, the current employment landscape and the fact that there are quite limited graduate opportunities this year due to the current economic environment. So on the next slide, you'll see the 4 categories of interventions or recommendations that we'll speak about. First and foremost, and my biggest recommendation and takeaway from today is set a goal. That's where you start, is what do you want, what kind of impact do you want to make, and how are you going to measure that? And I'll talk more about sort of very low cost ways to implement that and start thinking about that today or tomorrow. Next is providing access to networks and opportunities. As I was speaking about with Tupelo, how can you help students to connect with opportunities that might be relevant to them? Share information via existing channels. So we know that our students use various platforms currently. How can you help to share information? We're not talking about creating bespoke content or super complex interventions. Rather, how can you help students have the information that they need to be successful in their job searches using the various digital tools that they're using right now. And then finally, helping students to build their CVs. So how can you help them to get the right set of experiences that will set them up for success in the job market? So I'll go into this first one, and then Nicole and I will bounce back and forth a little bit. So as I said, my first and foremost recommendation really is start by setting a goal. What's the impact that you want to achieve? What kind of impact do you want to make related to employment specifically? And we've included here a few things that Dell Young Leaders and Moshal measure in terms of how we think about impact and what our goals are. So For us, first and foremost, the sort of easiest thing to measure is the % of students that are employed or pursuing further study post-graduation. And we set a time frame to it. We say within 3 months. We want to know by within 3 months of graduation how many students have found employment or are pursuing meaningful career enhancing further study that will help them to continue developing their careers. Then we also look at salary. So as Kathy said, I think the average SAGEA starting salary was 220,000 Rand. We like to look at how do our Dell Young Leaders compare, because part of our goal is not just to make sure everyone gets a job, but to make sure that they get the best job so that they really can support their family and pull that family out of poverty, as we've said. And then the last one, which I'll be quite honest, we haven't perfected how to measure this yet, is we want to continue to enable our alumni to have economic mobility. So our goal is that when students graduate, they can get the best job possible, but then how can we continue to keep them engaged in the program and continue to develop our alumni so that they go on to hold meaningful careers? And this is something we're still thinking about. So if anyone has ideas on how to measure this, I'm happy to have a conversation following this conversation. And then in terms of measurement, I just want to flag that it doesn't have to be a super complex tool or fancy technology solution that you use to measure these things. One thing we're thinking about from an alumni perspective is starting a LinkedIn alumni group. And then you can just look at, okay, what are the various jobs and companies that students hold and how many are employed and how many aren't. And you can tell that just by looking at people's LinkedIn profiles. So that's sort of a first easy step to get started and see where people are and what they're doing. You can also do a destination survey. This is something that I'd recommend if you do. You can use easy tools like SurveyMonkey, but you can easily incentivize this too. So for example, our students get one final scholarship disbursement upon their graduation, but it's contingent upon them completing the destination survey and providing us with data on where they're going, what their job is, and what they'll be earning. And then there's nothing wrong with Excel tracking. We do it a lot as well. So again, you don't have to have a big CRM tool that you're tracking all of your students in. We do a lot of Excel tracking to be able to have a conversation with someone. They tell us that they're employed. We type it in Excel to be able to track it. So that works too and is a great first start for setting a goal and measuring your outcomes. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nicole to talk about the next recommendations.
Thanks, Caitlin. So for the next part of the conversation, what we try to do is give you some practical examples of having, low resources, or you might have a psychosocial support or program coordinator who would need to do this as part of the existing role. So we really try to look at a low resource model because we are aware not everyone on the call has got, big not support, but representation in terms of the career or the employment aspect. So from a networking events perspective, two practical examples is, as Moshal, we have partnered with our career services on campus, and where they were having employer-led events, we would then partner with them in that aspect. So from a cost perspective, it doesn't have to be, at a fancy venue, etc. There's nothing wrong with using a conference facility on campus, getting the local supplier to provide some snacks and food and just get everyone together and talking. So again, it doesn't have to be a high resource initiative, but definitely very high in terms of impact. Also using our alumni instead in terms of industry-led panels. And what this basically means is you take an extract of your students, whether it's third years or postgrad or even second years. You have a look at the alumni data that you've gathered in terms of what industries they are in and what roles they are in, and then you do the pairing. So this can easily be done via Zoom. Of course, this is data and accessibility dependent, but it's just using the alumni to talk around their experiences of how they integrated from university to the world of work, what the first year or two was like for them, and really just empowering the students with that information. Also, just in terms of having an employer partner strategy, you don't need 400, 500, 600 employers because that's very resource intensive. Again, looking at what sort of the first and final year students look like from a degree or an industry, possible industry perspective, and then targeting a few key employers as an initial start in terms of building those networks. It makes no sense that if you only have, as an example, 1 or 2 LLB graduates coming through your pipeline to go and speak to 10 or 12 law firms, but you might have a bigger cohort of science, or you might have a bigger cohort of those in the financial services sphere, and then rather targeting that based on the cohort of your students over the years. And then also quite a low-hanging fruit is connecting with industry bodies. So we had a couple of our accounting students that initially decided that they want to go the CA route, and we've had partnerships with SAGEA, but as you know, it's quite a difficult 4 years and plus 3 years that they need to do their articles and those sort of things. And we said, what other qualifications are available? Can we speak to the CMAs of the world and also just provide our students with additional information that they wouldn't necessarily have had? So that's just our take on the employer networking perspective. And then I think for both ourselves and Caitlin and what they do on their side as well, having the alumni as part of your employability strategy is completely key. They don't necessarily have 10, 20 years of experience, but what they do have is that initial grounding, which we know is as shaky as what it is for matriculant to go into first year. It's just as daunting for a final year student going into the world of work. So really engaging our alumni on a variety of topics. And it's also, in COVID, I mean, we are doing most of this via Zoom, but I think someday we might be able to have it on campus again with face-to-face engagements, but I think virtually that connection can still be there. The other aspect of where we've used our alumni is in terms of interview preparation, and again, we try and do the matching per industry. So if an LLB grad is going for an interview at a medium-sized or big law firm, we have a look to see who of our alumni have either interviewed there or they are working there, and we will provide the sort of generic interview skills, but we're not specialists. Like, we don't know necessarily what an interview in FMCG would look like versus banking. So by using our alumni to help our students prepare for that, that has really yielded a lot of return on investment for us. And then, of course, just broadly leveraging our alumni network to assist us and in terms of the student journey. And then I think just from a team perspective, again, like I said, I'm making the assumption that not everyone on the call who is participating has got a dedicated career team, but there is still an opportunity, whether it is via LinkedIn, whether it is via the university, career services, to share some of these opportunities with our students. We know that during COVID, our students who were not able to stay on in JES had to go back to areas where they didn't necessarily have access, 24 access to Wi-Fi or super fast Wi-Fi. We would gather all of those and we would put it on WhatsApp for them as a quick link, rather than them using their data to sort of troll through websites to get to these opportunities. We also follow a guided application process, and we do that with the alumni, where we really sort of unpack what are the steps, and then have a look at how we can give them more information through the journey, especially when it comes to the daunting things sometimes like psychometric assessments. A lot of our students have never been exposed to it, and it can be quite daunting. So just having someone navigate them through some of those talent attraction processes has also really worked. Leveraging the career fairs, our career services, I've already used a couple of those examples, having a look at some of the events. A lot of them are also offering really good mock interview programs, brand awareness programs, and it could either be something that they do for you in particular, or it could be something that they are already offering as part of the support. But I think it's important that the universities that you work with to really foster that relationship and see what is on offer and how you can leverage or encourage your students to participate in those as well. And then of course there are a lot of free online tutorials. I know YouTube could sometimes also be quite data heavy. There are things like TED Talks that you can download. There are thousands of free CV templates that you can use aligned to what CVs should be looking like in 2020. There's interview support, etc., all available as free resources online. So the team could sort of just have a look at what is available and then share those via WhatsApp as well. And then something that we are embarking on, we're doing video CVs, and it's really ourselves asking our students 3 questions via Zoom. We record it, so if a corporate or an employer is interested in talking to them, we can, with their CV and their transcript, we can send through this short Zoom recording just to give a bit of life to the person on the other side of the piece of paper. And then what we've also done, or what I would recommend to do is, if you have any alumni that are possibly either not employed or they're taking longer to be employed, you can also, you know, pay them a small stipend and ask them to assist you with some of these interventions that you might not have the capacity in terms of a resource. So also upskilling internally, it could be someone that's doing, be doing a dual role, and maybe 10 or 20% of what they do speaks to this, the employability aspect of it. So these are just some quick wins and key examples that we've implemented, and that we also would hope that you could learn from. And again, if there's any more information that you would want on how we've done it, we're very happy to share some of our quick wins and our learnings with you as well, relating to employability.
Okay, so I'll talk about how we're communicating with some of our students. So Nicole's highlighted a lot of the tools and resources available. As she said, there's tons of resources. You don't have to go create your own. You can share things from LinkedIn Learning, from YouTube, etc. But how do we actually make sure that our students have the information that they need and are taking the actions that they should in order to set themselves up for success? Because a key challenge we see is that there's so much information out there that students could spend hours doing Google searches. And so we really look at our role as how can we curate the right set of experiences and learning opportunities so that our students are set up for success, and how can we prompt them to take actions at strategic times so that they are getting access to employers, opportunities, and doing the things that they need to do at the right time to be successful in their career search. So looking at this, I just want to highlight that we haven't created some fancy app or fancy tools to connect with our students. Rather, we're meeting them where they are and using the tools that they're already using. So for example, I'd highlight that most universities, or many universities across South Africa, are using Simplicity. So as Nicole has already mentioned, we do push students to engage directly with their career services, to log into that portal and look for jobs, to take advantage of the CV reviews and LinkedIn reviews that exist already through there, or the employer sessions. That's where all of the career fairs are when they're being held on campus normally, and info sessions. And we're seeing that a lot of employers are continuing to hold those types of events and still advertising through the university career fair, or sorry, the university career portal, even if they're holding their own sort of virtual sessions and going directly to students. So that's a great resource that we can direct students to. We're also using social. So our primary channel at the Dell Young Leaders program from a social perspective is Instagram. We've used this to share careers information, but also we get students to engage and participate. So as you would have heard on a previous session, we had a wellness challenge, and we had students send in photos of themselves doing the activities. So it's a way to build community and also share stories with students. We share alumni stories here. We also, as you'll see here on the right, share sort of nudges of things that we want students to do. So this was an advertisement for the SAGEA virtual career fair, just reminding students that the career fair was open, they should log in and start chatting with employers. And we see pretty strong engagement. Of course, data is always a consideration with Instagram. So it doesn't get as broad of a reach as WhatsApp, which I'll talk about next, but we do actually see students using this in their daily lives, and they like feeling a sense of the Dell Young Leaders community, in particular now that they're all at home. So we can't have in-person events, we have virtual events, but this is a way for them to sort of see and interact with each other and build community in a different virtual way that they're used to using in their daily lives. WhatsApp is one of our primary tools for communicating with students. And in particular, we've invested a lot in leveraging WhatsApp. It's the quickest way we found to get students to take an action. So for example, if I need a student to update their CV, I send them a quick WhatsApp and say, you know, I think that there's a job opportunity I found that would be a great fit for you. Here's a link to it. Let me know if you're interested, and please send me your latest CV. And they'll take action with that much faster than sending them an email or any other type of activity. We also see from a data and bandwidth perspective, I mean, as you all know, as consumers yourselves, it's significantly cheaper to buy a WhatsApp bundle than it is to buy your average data bundle. So it's a useful tool to engage with students, and it actually helps to save them money through their job search as well. LinkedIn, we are looking at LinkedIn as the go-to professional tool. And I think that's because what we're seeing in the market is that the market sees it that way as well. So this is where we're driving students to get their employment information, to look for jobs, among other resources, of course. And we're actually even looking at LinkedIn for students to build CVs. So LinkedIn has recently launched a resume builder tool, which helps students to create a perfectly formatted CV in just minutes based on their LinkedIn profile. And this is great because it actually lowers the effort on our side. We don't have to help students build a LinkedIn profile and build a CV. Once their LinkedIn profile is perfect, they can generate a CV from it, and then they don't have to fuss around with formatting and templates and things like that. We've also found really good engagement with LinkedIn messaging. I think the student feels like, you know, it could lead to a job opportunity, or like someone is looking at their profile, so they must respond. But if you ping them on LinkedIn and say, hey, I noticed you haven't updated your profile, you know, would you just go ahead and do that? I found great engagement and response through that. And then of course we use email to communicate with our students. And we do find that they largely open our emails, and we're able to track that via something like MailChimp or other tools. But it's slower to provoke action, and it's more information sharing versus getting students to do something. So we use it more for like newsletters or general announcements where we don't need students to sort of do something urgently. So I've already talked about on the right the Instagram post. You'll also see here, this is a sample from the Moshal Scholarship, a WhatsApp campaign that they use to share career resources. So again, students often don't realize all the resources available to them. So it's a quick way to share a super low bandwidth photo or link and just say, I think you'd really benefit from completing these resources. I know you have an interview next week. Why don't you go take this mock interview or read these questions or something like that. It's a great way to share information with students and engage with them and get their feedback as well. Okay, with that, I'm turning it back over to Nicole to talk through capability development.
Thanks, Caitlin. So I think the biggest learning for me coming into this space from a corporate environment is building your CV as a 17-year-old is quite a challenge. So what we encourage our first years to do is we give them a template and we ask them to complete their CV. So it's a practical example to sort of show them that there is not much going on at that particular point in time. And then what we do is we say, if this were to be your CV in 4 years' time, what are some of the things that you would like for it to be on, so that you can be a shining star when it comes to the application process. So these are just a couple of examples. So encouraging our students to leverage off existing resources on campus. So if you join a relevant society, and we focus on relevance because there's a cost involved, there's a time resource involved. So it makes no sense for someone who's studying law to join the ComSci society. It's probably better for them to join the law society. And try and do this gradually, and not get to postgrad or get to your final year. You want to be the soccer captain, you want to be the res leader, you want to do all of those things. So I think it's important that they start building this from their first year, and they start balancing their activities with their academic commitments as well. The other thing that I also just want to mention is finding part-time job opportunities on campus. So we get a lot of comments from our students to say they need a bit of extra money. The stipend that we give them isn't enough. There's some issues also at home. They want to maybe go into waitressing or working in a store, which there's nothing wrong with it. But when you take on part-time job opportunities on campus, whether it be as a peer facilitator or working in the career services offices, being an admin assistant in your own department, those opportunities are set up according to the academic calendar. So if you have an exam, the department already knows that it's exam period and they'll either decrease your hours, etc., versus finding an opportunity that is off campus where you need to travel. It takes a lot of your time. You're probably not going to have that flexibility in terms of asking for time off. So if you have any students that are in this position, I would encourage you to tell them to find out what job opportunities are available on campus. And again, it's not only from a monetary perspective, it also teaches them skills around how they budget, how they can, you know, it's their leadership capabilities. There's a whole lot. It's not just about filling your CV, it's the actual skill set that comes with juggling both a part-time job as well as your academics. And this is also something that we continue driving for our students, is the notion of volunteering. It could be on campus, it could be back in their communities. A simple example would be for a university student to go back to their school in the first June, July break, and to go and talk to the scholars, or go back to their own schools and talk to their fellow students or from the school that they are, around what university life is like, what career opportunity, or what opportunities are available, how do you apply for scholarships and bursaries, maybe something around NSFAS, etc. So those are practical examples of how even first-year students can add value to the communities that they were brought up in. And I spoke around the next point, which is gradually building your CV, doing something from first year. It might be small, second year, third year, and fourth year. So as you now look back at your CV as a postgrad, you've really done the most in terms of building your CV, making it, I think more attractive, but also building the skill set that goes together with it. I think it's also important that we talk around this transfer of skills, because there's not always a direct link for students, part-time job versus how this can actually help them in their working environment, in a real job, for lack of a better word. So I think it's also important that we remind them of the benefits of this, that it's not only short-term, that it has much longevity in terms of just building their own capabilities. And then also within the program, we look at creating opportunities for leadership and skills development. So using our more senior students to either be buddies to our junior students. I might be teaching to the converted here. There could be opportunities for them to help out from an admin perspective. There could be opportunities for them to, do facilitation. And these are all practical things that you don't have to, it's low resource. It might take a bit of their time, but it's important for them to be building some of those capabilities. The one thing that I just want to mention in closing of the slide is when we do any I think training or facilitation, we always reference the World Economic Forum, their graduate skills of the future for 2020. And a couple of the things that come up here is around problem solving, coordinating with others, service orientation, critical thinking, etc., which I'm also very happy to share. And a lot of the time, these skills are outside of the classroom. So it's important that we continuously build these out of classroom capabilities and using some of the resources that I've mentioned now. So it's not that we're doing this into thin air. It really speaks to the skills of the future or the out of classroom capabilities. And that's really the foundation of when we are growing this holistic graduate, that we look at the technical and academic functions that come with the degrees, but also how we can teach some of the negotiation, cognitive flexibility, judgment, creativity as part of the program, but also as part of the other resources that I've mentioned earlier on. So that's really just some practical tips on how they can create a world-class CV and capabilities while they are also doing their academic commitments throughout their studies.
So I
Great.
think the last thing we just, oh, sorry, Jody, go ahead.
Caitlin, did you want to ask about other suggestions?
I was going to, but if you're jumping in, I'm happy for you to do it and then take us straight on.
Perfect. So thank you, Nicole and Caitlin, for providing us with some really low cost but highly impactful solutions. And there are countless. There are many, many, many options. What we did want to ask was to provide it to the floor and find out whether there's anybody that's doing other things that weren't mentioned in the slides. So we've seen quite a lot of chat, which is really, really great. But does anybody maybe want to turn on their video and just share one or two things that you're doing that we could maybe share with the rest of the wider group? I see we've got 72 participants, which is a really good audience. So if anybody's doing anything that we haven't chatted about, please feel free to stick on your video so we can see, and let's just do some knowledge sharing.
Jody, it's Murray from Study Trust.
Hi, Murray.
I see in our participation list that we are also joined today by Ruda Landman. Welcome, Ruda. And just to announce to everyone that Ruda has written a very useful guide for final year students to help them bridge the divide into the world of work, and then even after that, you know, how to give advice as to how to act professionally. Kathy was also very much involved in the research period and giving us lots of contacts and also distributing the guide. So I'm going to put the link to our little video in the chat, and maybe Ruda can just also tell something about the guide, if you don't mind.
Lovely. Thanks, Murray. Ruda, if you would just like to say a few words, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to share this, because we are really excited about it. We put together a booklet called Grad Next, and as Murray says, it's available online now. We did a similar one for first years about 5 years ago, and that's been distributed widely to all the campuses for you know, and that has the soft skills of time management, money management, study methods, preparing for an exam, etc., etc. And then in the last 6 months, we've done one for exactly this transition that you're talking about, and I'm very happy when I listen to people like Nicole and Caitlin, and I realized that, Murray, we did cover most of the areas that they referred to, which is fantastic. And it's Grad Next for the final years or the senior students is available online. I'll put that link up as well. Oh, there it is. Thanks, Murray. And there's also an audio version. So we divided it up in 20 small episodes. So that's also available, and it's under the, what's it called? The communal commons, what? There's a copyright, what is it, Murray? The copyright, say it
Creative Commons.
That's right, which means that no one has to pay for it. You can download, you can send it on to anyone, and as long as you acknowledge the source. So if anyone wants to use this, we will only be too happy. Thank you.
And just obviously, thanks to the sponsors, this guide was also Van Skyke Publishers was very much involved in making it, and then Capitec Bank gave us the money to distribute it and also to do the audio version of it that's read by Ruda herself. So thanks for that.
Great, thanks, Murray. Thanks, Ruda. I think at this point in time, back to Russell's point about how everything's changed with COVID, I think any resources that we can get our hands on will be much appreciated. So thanks for sharing that link, Murray. We'll make sure that everybody gets that also in the email that we send out later. We will be sharing, as Nicole said earlier, the presentations as well as the recording if anybody wants it, but also between Dell and Moshal,
we have a lot of resources that we're prepared to share. So if anybody does want extra resources on the campaigns that any of us have run, you're most welcome to reach out to myself, and I will more than happily facilitate that, that you get access to the resources that you want. So before we move on to our panel, which is a big chunk of our presentation this morning, I just wanted to check, is there anybody else that wanted to share anything before we move on? So any other tips or pointers that they're doing, that the organizations are doing that maybe weren't covered this morning, you can either raise your hand or you can turn your video on, and hopefully we'll be able to see who you are. Okay, I see someone from Tomorrow Trust. Ria, is that you?
Yes, it is me. Sorry about that. My video is taking a bit of time to come on. Oh, there we go. So, I mean, I think it's so great in terms of just like all the information that's been shared so far. I think what I've found to be especially important to share with students, especially now with the world of work and what it looks like now, is just sort of helping them understand that getting into employment or getting into your career is an evolving journey. I think sometimes people leave school or go into varsity thinking that it's going to be very linear and very straightforward, and I'm going to go from this step to this step to this step, but then helping them understand how it evolves, how you go from, you know, one thing to another, how important it is to network, you know, just helping them understand that it is a very dynamic process, and helping them along with those steps, you know, getting into a flow, or, you know, understanding that their journey is going to be quite unique and quite dynamic in that sense. So that has been really helpful to not only realize myself how things have changed so much, but then also helping our students to figure out things in that way, and helping them and supporting them in that process.
That's really helpful, Ria. Thank you. I agree completely. Okay, if nobody's got any other questions, I think we're going to move on. We've like to dedicate some time to some prescribed questions that we have, but then we'd also like to leave an opportunity for Q&A after the panel session. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. They are all speakers that you have heard from this morning. And I think as far as experts go, we're incredibly lucky to have this panel with us today. So we have Kathy Sims, we have Nicole, Leah Isaacs is the one person we haven't heard from yet. Leah joined the Moshal Scholarship Program just over a month ago. Leah has a very strong history with in retail in the FMCG group, and has joined our program as a careers coordinator. We've got Caitlin and we've got Pam, who was going to moderate, and unfortunately Pam's connection keeps dipping, which is why I've taken over, but Pam will then come on as a panelist instead. So without any further ado, I'm going to start with our first question. Please ask your questions into the chat. Carla will be monitoring the chat, and we will answer the questions at the end. And I think what's easiest is if you do have a question for a specific panelist, if you pose the question with the panelist's name so that Carla can manage it at the end, and then we can pose those questions to the panelists once we're done. So our first question will need to go to Kathy. And Kathy, what value can be found in joining an industry body? We know that, like Nicole said, if you've got 2 law students and 5 actuaries and a dentist, you don't want to approach 200 different corporates. But how do we make sure that that we're approaching the right people? And I guess an industry body might be that group of people.
Yeah, thanks. You know, one of the things that that has helped me tremendously in my career, and that's probably one of the reasons why I started SAGEA in South Africa, you know, 16 years ago, was to have a community to talk to. Most of us are in positions where there's 1 or 2 of us in an organization. So it's always helpful to collectively try and solve problems, and figure out what happens to people and how they go about making decisions, et cetera, in your community. So I have found the community of SAGEA obviously very helpful, to the point that I, you know, obviously lead it now, but I also belong to a couple of other associations as well. And this is based on the areas that I'm interested in. So for example, when I was at Accenture, I was a member of the Computer Society of South Africa, now called IITPSA. I am part of the Institute of Risk Management, which has been enormously helpful for me as a governance expert to understand how to run SAGEA. I'm also part of international networks and communities to help me and guide me in what are the latest trends, etc., etc. For those of you that are in the space of employment, and let's, for example, say that you have a lot of chartered accountants or a lot of engineers that are coming through your programs, it really makes sense to connect and understand what is happening in that sector, who the community is, what is going on, what the market is doing, what are the trends, etc., etc. So it's really like having an extended work family of interested parties in a particular area. So I would highly recommend that where you can, joining some kind of community that will support you, much like this one, that will support you through the big questions that you have.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Caitlin, a question to you. So if you're having to quickly upskill your team, we now know that employment support needs to become a focus, particularly during COVID. But if you have to upskill a team member, what tools do you start with? Where do you start?
Yeah, so this is a very personal question to me, because for those of you that I don't know, which are probably most of you, I'm actually not I don't have a background in careers. I recently joined the Dell Foundation from consulting. I worked at Deloitte for 4 or 5 years. So what I've done that has really helped is first of all, go to some of these industry bodies that Kathy is referring to, sign up to their newsletters. Also use the university website. So for example, I had a law student come to me wanting to talk about sort of next steps and key decisions in their career. So I went to the UCT law faculty page, and they have a whole set of careers resources that you can refer to. But what I'll highlight there is I also, as Kathy has talked about already, I also know my limitations. So when a law student is asking me, well, gosh, you know, I'm not happy in my articles, one of our alumni, is it possible to change firms? How would I do that? I referred them to another one of our alumni that was, you know, 5 years or so into their career, because while I'm an expert in consulting and the tech industry, I'm certainly not an expert in the legal field. So that's the other thing I would just recommend, is really thinking about building a network around you and thinking about who you can refer people to. So you can upskill yourself quickly to answer the basic questions of, okay, a chartered accountant needs to get a training contract and be a trainee for a few years before they get an official job. And those things are easy enough. But when it comes to the tough decisions, being able to refer people to the right place and knowing who those sort of go-to people are in order to do that.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Is there anything else that anyone on the panel want to add to that? Okay,
yes, I'd like to just add to that. So what I would also just encourage you all to do when it comes to employment support is to find partners and collaborations that you can make with other people in the industry in the same space, in the career space. So for us, we blessed to be part of the SAGEA membership, which really gives us an opportunity to learn about what corporates are doing, what the recruitment trends are, what they're searching for. So if you're not able to join an association such as SAGEA, to just do research and to go on LinkedIn and follow the corporates and actually see what they're looking for in their candidates. And in that way, you're upskilling yourself by learning what the trends are and keeping abreast with the changes that are happening and the disruptions that are taking place in the job market.
Great, thank you, Pam. Our next question, I'm going to put to 3 of you, and I'm going to do it in segments. So it would be around, particularly with COVID, do we encourage our students to graduate and get out and find a job? Do we encourage them to rather stay behind and do a postgrad or a further study? And then Nicole, I'm going to ask you, particularly during COVID, how is this different? So Kathy, can we start with you perhaps? Do we encourage students to get out and get a job? Do we encourage them, Caitlin, maybe you can talk around further studying, and Nicole, if you can address COVID. Thank you. Kathy.
Sorry, just waiting for tech to work. So, I mean, I think I'm a big fan of postgraduate study anyway. I think in today's market where, where globally skills, there's a significant enhancement in skills happening with young talent, I think it's something important to consider. When I worked at UCT and students asked me, should I study further or should I go and look for a job? I always used to say to them, well, it depends why. Why do you want to look for a job, or why do you want to study further? So that becomes a deep question. If they want a deeper understanding of the subject, to create their own thinking, to have their own voice around the topic, then of course studying further is important. Some careers lend themselves to you must have a postgraduate. So for example, in the quantitative space, let's say it's financial mathematics, or let's say it's data science, the evidence shows us that 80% of the graduates that work in that space have a postgraduate. So that's the competition if that's the area you want to go into. Similarly, you can't call yourself an economist or a scientist unless you have a master's or a PhD. So you need to understand the context of where you're going. The other thing I would say with postgraduate is that it also depends on the company. And perhaps they sponsor postgraduate studies as well. Not necessarily in the first year, because settling in, you're learning things, you're moving to a new town, city, whatever. But certainly, as a further development opportunity. But I used to say to students, it doesn't have to be an or, it should be an and. So pursue both as if they were the next plan. And then whoever gives you the best opportunity that works for you, then that's what you need to do. But again, if you start overlaying to the COVID situation, the last thing you want to do is have someone who has spent so much time at university to change their life and then put them back at home because the job market is dead. So I think it's important to understand the why and then move from there.
Yeah, Kathy, I agree with you. I think it really does depend on industry as well. So I'm a big fan, and we encourage our students to have a plan A and a plan B. And I always tell them, just because you get a job offer or just because you get accepted to a postgraduate program doesn't mean you have to take it, which sometimes feels like a bit of a revolutionary thing that they hadn't thought about before. So that's number one, plan A and plan B. But I'll say it really depends on the industry that you're working in. So for example, in the tech industry, which is quite big in the Western Cape in particular, and emerging in Joburg, experience is king. And a student with 1 million certifications, 1 million trainings, 2 master's degrees will not compare to the student that has actual applied work experience building an app or in product development or in design and has a beautiful portfolio. They just don't compare. Experience will always get you a better job offer. And companies like Amazon, which are big here, are actually defining the future, and universities are lagging in that space specifically, is what we've seen and heard from employers. So in those sort of industries and programs where technology is changing super quickly and actually industry is innovating faster than universities, getting that hands-on experience is often much more practical. And then if the employer wants you to have a master's program, they'll often sponsor you to go back or give you sort of a set of leave so that you can do that. So again, it's where having labor market understanding and industry understanding is really important before you advise students on these important decisions.
Thanks, Kathy and Caitlin. Sorry, Jody, can I go?
No,
yeah.
Over to you, Nicole.
So Caitlin spoke earlier on around measurements and putting metrics or success factors in place. And the one thing that we are measured on is a quality job within 3 months of graduating. And you can imagine that given the current COVID situation, that's definitely one of the things that's keeping me awake at night. We rely heavily on the data and the science that we get from SAGEA, and we know that come next year, 1st of April, we might not be sitting at a 91% placement rate of our graduates. So we are partnering with incubators. In our space in particular, we have had many conversations with Capacity. Fiona over there is doing amazing work, offering an incubator space for graduates who are maybe exiting with a undergrad. Maybe they didn't get the required 65%, or they didn't make the top 20 of their undergrad class to go into honors, and yet they have skills, but it might not be job ready skills. So they do a lot of work in terms of the new sort of the cloud computing space with Amazon. They do work with big banks and financial services. And what it is for 6 or 8 months after a graduate has completed their undergrad or even their postgrad, they can go into this incubator space. They get specific tech skills. I mentioned cloud computing. They also do particular things on the data science side, as well as programming. And it just gives them more leverage in terms of being more employable. So instead of someone sitting at home for 6 to 8 months or even 10 months next year, why not offer opportunities in these spaces where they're learning a particular skill, a future skill? They are, they don't have this whole, not stigma, but the whole emotion that comes with being unemployed. And come the end of next year or 2022, we hope there's some recovery after COVID. We've given them a lot more than maybe doing a job that pays okay, but it's not maybe in line with their skill set or what they studied. So that's just one of the examples how we are trying to mitigate the risks that come with unemployment because of COVID and just the general South African context, and finding creative ways or spaces for our students to go into should they not be fortunate enough to enter a graduate program or an internship program.
Great.
Thanks
Nicole. Thank you. Okay, Kathy, sorry, back to you. It feels like it's your day. It's your morning in the limelight. We've spoken at length around what organizations can do that don't necessarily have an employment support team. But can you just give us a couple of quick ones? Just highlight a couple of things that organizations can do if they don't have a dedicated employment support department.
Well, I think, you know, if I was in that situation and I had students who were studying a particular degree or studying a particular area of focus and I didn't know much about it, to help them, two things that I would do. One is I would do some basic research myself on you know how that market works, and it's not difficult. When I was at UCT, I led and started the destination project for the university, and what that meant is, and I mean, it was a cunning plan, really. Essentially, what happens is the day before graduation, you have to go and stand in a terribly long queue to go and get a gown. And you sit idle and you sit on your phone. And essentially what happened was we used to then go in the old days with clipboards, and more recently now they just use an iPad, and we ask the questions, the destination questions. You know, what are you doing next year? What are you earning? Which industry? Are you doing something that you hope to do? Are you in first choice, second choice? What, you know, where are you in the space? And the wonderful thing about that kind of captive audience is that we used to get upwards of 75% response rate. So we had deep data of at least 5,000 to 7,000 students every year. And UCT has been collecting that for probably 12 years now. So how that then played out was I could then go to Suki Goodman as the head of industrial psychology and say, over the last 10 years, this is where your graduates have got jobs. This is what they earn. This is, so you can actually start giving feedback to the sector. Or you could go and have a difficult discussion with the head of department and say, it seems like the students that are graduating are struggling to find jobs. Here's the actual job numbers. Here's how many are unemployed. What can we do to help them? How can you help us to help the students? So it became a collaborative project. So that's inside of a university. And we should be calling on our careers advisors at the universities to help us, help our students. The second part is just a simple example. So I had a student jump on the obviously we've been running a virtual career fair, and I had a student jump online and say, I don't see any opportunities for regional and town planning. So, you know, I don't know anything about regional and town planning. It's not an experience that I've, or an industry that I've worked in a lot. But logic tells me if you're doing planning for a town or a city or a province or a country, that typically the kind of people who would be doing that would be government, be it local or national government. So the first thing that I could say to them, well, actually, we have the local government SETA actually at the career fair. So why don't you go and have a chat to them as a first point? But tell me which university you're from. And the student said, I'm from University of Pretoria. And I literally went onto the University of Pretoria's alumni page, so LinkedIn alumni page for the University of Pretoria. I typed in regional planning, and I found immediately 784 graduates who were in industry working as regional planners. I then said, here's a top 10 list of where these graduates work in South Africa or abroad, because a student might say, well, actually, I'm from Kenya. So you can actually help that student. So it's not rocket science, given the wonderful tools that we have to actually start the process. And, you know, just imagine a student phoning an alumni and say, my name is so-and-so, I'm doing a regional planning degree. I noticed you're an alumni of Pretoria, and I noticed that you've gone this path. Can I ask you for a cup of coffee and just to chat to you about how you approached your journey? And I mean, I can't imagine any alumni saying, I really don't have time for you. No, because everybody's proud of their journey. So that's the kind of approach. It's called informational interviewing. It's been around for 50 years. We just use different ways to get there now. But it's a superb way to just start the process. But don't take control of it yourself. Help your student help themselves through this process.
Thank you, Kathy. It's really insightful. And then I think, Nicole, if you can add on to that, building on from what Kathy's already said, if you now are that person that has to start providing some sort of employment support within your organization, but actually you're not a lawyer and you've never walked the lawyer's journey, where do you turn to? Short of, you know, at some point you've got to put your hand up and say, maybe I'm not the best person to have this exact conversation, but how do I find out some information?
Mm-hmm. So I have a practical example with regards to that. So when we were doing the social mobility study, we realized that our law graduates, and those of them are either in articles, most of them are still in articles, there was a disparity between what the SAGEA salary information was giving us and what our law graduates were actually earning. And it was a concern because when we looked at things like their payback agreement, it's much longer, not payback agreement, sorry, payback term, it's much longer than their counterparts in different industries. And I then contacted a HR business partner from one of the big 5 law firms through networks, through hustling. It's not just someone that, you know, just appeared. And I had him have a conversation with us to talk about what does the law landscape look like. Fortunately, he's worked in medium size, in the bigger law firms as well, so we had a view. And just having that hour conversation with someone in that industry who understood it intimately, what is the difference between doing your articles at the big 5 versus a medium-sized firm versus doing your exam through the Law Society, it really opened up our minds, because if we were looking at the data in particular, all we would have done was said, law does not make sense for us. They take X amount of years to actually be financially independent. Therefore, we won't be sponsoring LLB or BCom laws anymore. But understanding what was actually happening in that industry from an industry expert really made the world of change. So I think drawing on your networks or finding ways to get, if you are not the expert in a particular field, finding ways to get to the expert and getting those nuggets of information really makes decision-making from a selection perspective, from a throughput perspective, and from an employability perspective, it really makes the world of difference. And again, it was a 1-hour call via Zoom. No one had to drive to an office in Sandton or office at the waterfront. You could literally do it at the comfort of your own home, and after an hour or two, with other research and inputs, have sound information about decisions that you need to make as a program. So that's really just one of the practical examples of finding information.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Does anybody else want to add to that? Any of the other panelists? No? Okay, let's move on. Thanks, Nicole. Okay, our last question that we have formatted for the panelists goes to Leah. And we're going to draw on Leah's corporate experience as opposed to her NGO experience. So Leah, I want to ask you, we know that our students are going to be one of how many students applying for a job. They're going to be one of how many CVs that sit on an HR recruiter's desk. Can you talk us through some of the tips for how to get them to be that 1 in 5 students who gets an interview, but also just chat to us about some of the pitfalls that students fall into when they are applying for roles. Thanks, Leah.
Sure, thanks, Jodie. Hi, everyone. To answer the question, so, based on my corporate experience, there's a lot of things that students, they don't do or they forget to do when they apply for these jobs. And I think to start off would be avoiding, any grammar errors on their CVs. So making sure that the information that they're presenting, that they do spell check, they ask someone else to proofread. It is important because, it gets to corporate, and if the front page, if there's something spelled wrong, that CV gets put aside because there's 500 more. So, most corporates deal with volume. And then also, displaying the correct contact information. I found this, in my experience, there were a number of occasions where students didn't check their email addresses on their CVs, their contact information. We struggle to get hold of them. We just move on to the next. It's that simple. So, they can be put aside so easily based on something so simple. Then, a lot of companies have recruitment systems, so which require students to answer specific questions. So in the application process, the company will have a certain amount of questions. If students don't answer those questions in that system, they will again be, put aside and not considered. So it is important that whatever the corporate is asking of the student, from an experience perspective, qualifications, that the students complete those questionnaires. And then also on the application forms to make sure that the information that they provide, again, meets the criteria. So, and always, there's lots of ways that you can avoid incorrect information being submitted. So always just ask to have a view and assist them where you can. Then a big one is around, a lot of students don't read the criteria. They don't look at the job spec and say, hey, do I tick those boxes? Do I, meet from a competency to a skill perspective, whatever that company is looking for, the student needs to ensure that they tick those boxes. Because if they don't, again, corporate's not going to look at the profile. It's going to be pushed aside. And then we know that in a lot of corporates, the minimum criteria for a graduate is around academics. So if they don't meet that minimum, if the corporate is saying 60% average as a minimum entry for this particular role, if they don't meet that, the corporate is not going to look at their CV. So just making sure that, all those points are considered and that the student is aware of it. And you assist them and coach them through that process, because just the applying process is the first step. If you don't get through, if you don't do that correctly, the chances are you're not going to land that interview. So those steps are critical because they are, these corporates on this call, and we all know, you sit with thousands of applications, and it's a tick box exercise, the initial phase. So do they tick the boxes? Is everything up to scratch, up to standard, and they get put forward? So I think those are some key things that we should look out for and help our students avoid making those mistakes through the application process. Thank you, Jodie.
Thanks, Leah. And as I said, I know that both organizations, we've certainly got resources that can help you with that. So if anybody does want access to any of our resources, please just let us know. We're big believers in not reinventing the wheel. So if we've already got PDFs of interview techniques and things, we're more than happy to share them and not expect everyone to rewrite them again. So those are all of the questions that we prepared as a kickoff for the panel. What we'd like to do now is open up the floor to anybody that has questions. You're welcome to turn on your video. At the moment, it would be great to see faces. If you would like to switch on your video and maybe raise a hand, you're welcome to ask a question either to one of the panelists in particular or to the entire panel generally. So if we can open that up, if anybody has any questions, please either raise your hand or switch your screen on, and we'll see if we can answer those questions for you.
Jody, I actually have one question that I've put in the chat, but I'll ask to Leah. So Leah, this is a key challenge that we face often, is that many of our students, not the majority of our students meet the minimum academic criteria, but there's always a subset of, say, 25% or so who don't, who have a GPA below 60% for various reasons, often tied to their background, not because they're, you know, any less smart or talented. And this is something I'm quite passionate about, because in my experience in consulting, the best consultants were not necessarily those with the best grades. So how do we help those students to best position their experience so that they can get considered? Or is it selecting different employers to apply to who don't have those criteria? And or how can we partner with employers to help them sort of look past, you know, the fact that a student failed a course in their second year because of various things that were happening at home?
So I do think, you know, with everything, it's understanding the circumstances of that individual, and it is important that, you know, how they display, if the academics don't meet that specific criteria, what else do they have to offer that the next candidate's not going to have to offer? So if they've, you know, had experience in back work, if they have volunteered, being part of societies, all those moving parts add value to that profile, because, you know, if they're not necessarily getting the academics, but from a abilities perspective, experience perspective, they, you know, in a better footing, they will be considered. So I think that's key. And then from the second part, so if, you know, for the student itself, there are other things that they could do, but it is important that they also apply to, if they apply to the Big Five, and that, as we know, that's an entry, and they don't meet that criteria, then go to medium-sized, smaller companies, look at which other corporates could be accessed. There are loads of organizations that are willing to consider graduates and at, you know, with the academic qualification, but not necessarily at that point. So just, you know, showing the students and helping them on that journey to pave, you know, where do you go, what are the other corporates that you can consider, but just giving them, you know, that kind of support. Because students, they go to career fairs, they see these big names, and, oh, these are the big corporates. This is, you know, this is it. That's not it. It's not only the Unilevers, the KPMGs out there. There are many other organizations that will still offer that opportunity, but they just need to know about it. And I think that's our role, is to ensure that we educate them about, you know, the landscape and where they're at. I hope I answered your question, Caitlin. Cool.
I'd like to add a point, if it's possible, please, on this, because Caitlin, it's something that burns my bum as well. The reality is, I have not yet seen a report, a research paper that says top performers at university make top performers in companies. I've never seen that. And I've been working in this space for 30 years, you know, so I'm waiting for that so that I can counter argue it. But the reality is, I would also say that I would have never joined Accenture at entry level, because I would have never been a consideration with my marks. I had to go and prove myself somewhere else and make myself attractive as an experienced hire to join Accenture. But what I would say is, and here's a counter argument, I was hosting an investment banking, international fancy investment banker at a university, at UCT one evening, as they were doing a wonderful presentation and cocktail party to try and attract the top Black investment bankers for the next year. And some student took them on about this and said, you know, so why do you insist that 70%, you know, is a minimum criteria, or 75% is a minimum criteria in your organization? Do you actually even know the population you're working with in South Africa? And it was interesting because the chap that actually responded, not only was he a South African Black professional himself, but, you know, he turned around and he said, I actually just cannot take you to my client and say, hey, meet Joe. He's our new investment banker. He only gets things right 70% of the time, or 30% of the time. So, you know, we have confidence that he's going to look well after your account. So, I mean, I kind of shrunk when I heard that, and I thought, oh God. But the reality is that, you know, there are some companies who hire very small numbers, who have very high needs. You will find that in strategy consulting as well. You know, if somebody says, I want to be a strategy consultant, they've got 55% average, it's not going to happen, certainly not in the beginning. So they have to go and turn that poor academic perception into an experience that makes them something else, or have different skills to offer in different areas. So I think it's about guiding students to understand that it depends what you want. And consulting and investment banking by nature, they don't take huge amounts of people in strategy and investment banking. They take small amounts, and therefore they have the ability to do that. It is important though also for universities and careers advisors to guide employers. And I'll give you another example. We had a top strategy firm saying, oh, you know, we want Black students who are business science, ideally female, that have an 85% and above, an 85% and above, right? Okay, so I was able, because I had the data available to me, to say, well, there are 652 students studying business science. There are 3 females who met that academic requirement. The one is going to Oxford next year, so sorry for you, they're really not interested. The second one signed articles, you know, 25 years ago. And the third one is an Alan Gray Orbis scholarship, who actually is going to go and start her own business. So we are the top university in South Africa in business science, according to the research. What would you like to do now? Would you like to take a white person, or do you want to actually really consider what you're asking for? And so take people on about those things, because it's just not true.
Thank you, Kathy. That's very valuable information. And one of the things that we've done at Moshal was we started, when we started our employment partnerships, was to kind of cherry pick the big names, the big fours of all of the industries. And then we realized very quickly that actually we don't service those sorts of students. We academically, as a program, we don't go for the 75 and above. Our criteria is that you get 65 for English, maths, and science. So if you're starting with a matriculant who got 65 for maths, how exactly are you expecting a 75% at the end of their honours degree? I mean, what is going to happen? We're a scholarship program, we're not magicians. And so what we did was we started to network with corporates that were maybe slightly smaller, that didn't necessarily see only the value in the marks, but actually would rather take a student who has a great story. And that was also part of the reason why we started doing we are starting to do the video interviews, because people actually need to see who our students are. They need to hear them speak. They need to understand their experiences. It's not all just about what's on the piece of paper. So that was a change in approach that we had. Russell, I saw your question about government. Kathy, is that something that you would like to, would you like to weigh in at all on dealing with government as an employer?
I'm not sure that I should weigh in, because it's a deeply disappointing exercise for me. I have seen a lot of state-owned entities getting involved in graduate programs. I haven't seen government get involved in graduate programs, other than obviously the health sector hiring nurses and doctors and, you know, that kind of teachers and that sector. It's something that has bothered me. And in fact, Carla, who's hosting us today, and I are having discussions about the high unemployment of young Black female teachers at the moment in South Africa. The reality is that I don't think government has yet stepped into the space of saying we need to build talent. They are doing amazing stuff in government in the Australian market, amazing. In the UK, amazing work, but in South Africa, sadly, nothing yet. But that doesn't mean that it isn't something that is important. And perhaps what we should do as a community is actually seek out conversation, for example, with Tato at the local government SAGEA, and say, can you come and talk to us about your member approach to young talent? How do they feel about it? You know, on the other hand, I mean, you know, my husband started as a bursar with government, you know, 50, 100 years ago, as a land surveyor. And, you know, he's still there because he's still having a great time, earning a good salary, really enjoying his job. So there are opportunities, but they had a very structured build strategy, you know, in the 80s to build engineers and land surveyors at that time. So it really depends on the skill. It depends on you know, the what kind of things. So, I mean, I know, for example, when I was at UCT, a lot of students say, I want to work in the diplomatic corps. But we could never get them to come and see us and come and talk to our students. So I think it's something that we should engage with at least the SETAs, you know, local government SETA, because I know them, and actually say, can you help us understand this market? What we have seen, though, in the data, not our data, but the data that comes out of the CDC, or CDE, I beg your pardon, Center for Development Enterprise, the report that they did a couple of years, it was called Graduate Unemployment, a much exaggerated problem, that government entry-level requirements for graduates has been declining for the last 15 years. That we did see in that report. And that's based on stats data. Stats South Africa data, sorry.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kathy. Right, I saw that we had a hand raised there. Can I open up for you to ask your question?
Is that for me?
Yes, that's for you. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, allow me to kick off by saying thanks for the presentation. It was exceptional. And I'm a newbie. I want to repeat this now. I'm very new in this space of working with grads for my corporate. So this was very informative, and therefore, thank you. I'm touching base with quite a few people. Kathy knows, Murray knows, etc., etc. So I am learning. I hear, though, that there's quite a lot of referencing to overseas countries in terms of what they are doing and what is benchmarked there, that we can maybe pick up on and see how best we can use. But I'm just wondering, how are we as a country viewed out there? Do we know what are we commended for? What are we standing out for as a player in this space? Is there any view on South Africa?
Does any of our panelists want to tackle that question?
Oh, sorry, but no, sorry. I'll unmute.
I can say a few words on that. Couple of things that I have found our local people have a lot to offer the global story. That is around adversity, how our young graduates and all our people deal with adversity. I think we have a lot of stories to tell around diversity and inclusion and understanding what that means in our context. I attended a conference 2 weeks ago and it was very, very dominant around Black Lives Matter. And it was really interesting because we got the Dean of Students from WITS to actually talk about what that means in South Africa from a social justice point of view. And it was so well received. So I think that we've got some stories to tell, but there's always been the perception that South Africans know how to work hard. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, you know, we need to think about what that means for us and what we can do in the context of South Africa. The big challenge that we've got, and this is a COVID-19 overlay again, is that, you know, gone are the days where if there was low demand in South Africa, you could push some graduates to Dubai or to Singapore. Demand has slowed everywhere in the world. So what we're going to have to do, and I think Caitlin, actually, you might want to say a few things about this, because you actually graduated in the first wave of the financial crisis, and what that actually meant in terms of your career development.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can chime in here as a foreigner. So I am American and have been living in South Africa for a few years now. But more from my experience as a hiring manager, both in the US and South Africa, I think something I've noticed sort of different between my experience abroad and my experience here is a much stronger focus among employers in South Africa on qualifications and a specific degree program leading to a specific job, and sort of students having to have the right certification and industry certification in order to qualify for something. Compared to my experience, just to give you an idea of my background, I studied English literature, ended up working in mergers and acquisitions in a global consulting firm, and now work for the Dell Foundation in sort of employment. So I think that is changing in South Africa, and through our conversations with employers, people are starting to look more at capabilities and what are transferable skills that people bring and how they might add value to their organization, because they recognize that it creates diverse teams that are more innovative. What I'll say in my experience, I graduated in 2008, and I think it really did push me to rethink what does it mean to be successful, and how can I continue to further my career during a time of great turmoil. So I graduated in 2008 with a degree in English literature. So like, what the heck are you going to do with that? And I ended up joining an international volunteering program, and I spent 3 years teaching English in rural Mozambique. And it allowed me to weather the storm. I had sort of support. I had enough of a paycheck to live there. And I was able to actually really catapult my career in ways that I didn't imagine, because it allowed me to develop as an individual, develop transferable skills, learn a foreign language, and get global experience, which then made me very marketable when I did return to the US a few years later, when the job market was dramatically different, and there was much more of an appetite for my skill set, and I could better articulate my transferable skills at that stage in my career. So I'd encourage you all to think about, what does success look like for the students that you're supporting? And in this case, it may be further study. It may be gap years where they do sort of interesting career enhancing things. It may be thinking about going into some sort of further skill development, whether that's through further study or through a coding boot camp or an internship program or other things that will help them to be a bit more marketable in the job market. And then I would also just encourage employers to really think about, when you're hiring for roles, what are the capabilities you're looking for, and how do students fit that versus, for human capital consulting, I just want industrial psychologists. Really, what are you looking for, and what are you trying to achieve, and how people might be able to fill those gaps.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. We are sadly running out of time. We really weren't sure how long this was all going to take today, but we have exactly 4 minutes left. So we're going to finish off our formal part of the presentation now. We have one slide left, which is to ask you to fill out the SurveyMonkey survey. We really do need the feedback. We need it for all of our organizations. We also want to use your feedback to try and improve these presentations as we go forward with them. So please, can I ask all of you to click on the link. You might need to type it into Google, and just give us some feedback on what you thought of today's session. There is a prize, and SurveyMonkey is time stamped. So the very first reply that we get will win a prize. We're not going to tell you what that prize is just yet, but I can tell you that it will be an awesome, awesome prize. So I want to thank our panelists, I want to thank our speakers, and I want to thank each and every one of you for taking up the time to give up 2 hours this morning to discuss this incredibly essential topic. As I did mention, as Pam mentioned in the beginning, and I've reiterated, we're here to help, and we do know that we're incredibly fortunate to have an employment support team in both organizations. If anybody would like any more information or any resources or any access to us, you're most welcome to drop me an email. My email address is just CM, which stands for Country Manager, and it's cm@moshalscholarship.org. I can certainly then direct you to the right people. But I just want to say thank you. Thanks to our panelists for your time, and thanks to everybody this morning for giving up your time to sit with us and to learn a little bit more about employment support. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday and enjoy Women's Day. Have a wonderful long weekend celebrating the wonderful women in our society. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. It was great.
Thanks.